Hi, fifth graders. Welcome to Chapter 7, Lesson 5 and Lesson 8. We are going to combine those two lessons today because they are similar in what we are doing. Our standard that we are looking at today for both lessons is in Number and Operations Fractions 5.5. This standard states, I can compare the size of a product to the size of one factor on the basis of the size of the other factor. I can explain the size of the resulting product of multiplying a given number by a fraction less than or greater than 1. I can also explain why multiplying a fraction by 1 in any form results in an equivalent fraction. So today we are not actually multiplying the fractions together or multiplying any mixed numbers and fractions together. We are just going to state whether our answer is less than, greater than, or equal to one of the factors that we are working with. So we are first starting with lesson 7.5 on page 445. And this lesson is comparing fraction factors and products. So our essential question is asking, how does the size of the product compare to the size of one factor when multiplying fractions? So under Unlock the Problem, it says multiplication can be thought of as resizing one number by another number. For example, 2 times 3 will result in a product that is 2 times as great as 3. So I notice with this, if I am multiplying 2 times 3, my answer, which I know equals 6, is going to be greater than both factors. So what happens to the size of a product when a number is multiplied by a fraction rather than a whole number? That's what we are working with lesson 7.5. So one way to do this is we could use a model. And each scenario will help us understand the certain rules that we can use when stating if our answer will be less than, greater than, or equal to one of the factors. So for A, it says during the week, the Delgado family ate 3/4 of a box of cereal. Well, I'm going to shade in 3/4 of a box of cereal. Obviously, that means I'm shading 3 out of the 4 sections of that box of cereal. So now they want us to write an expression for 3/4 of one box of cereal. Well, because we are taking 3/4 of one box, we're taking 3/4 times 1. Remember that the of for 3/4 of one box is telling us to multiply. So if I multiply 3/4 times 1, will the product be equal to, greater than, or less than 1? Well, I know that when I multiply any factor by 1, the product will be less than 1 or equal to the other factor that you're working with. So because they're asking, will the product be equal to, greater than, or less than 1, we have to say the product will be less than 1. I also know the product will be equal to 3/4. Because again, any factor times 1 always equals that original factor. Moving on to B. The Ling family has 4 boxes of cereal. They ate 3/4 of all the cereal during the week. Well, we need to show 3/4 of 4 boxes of cereal. So we are going to shade in 3/4 for each box of cereal. So my expression, because I'm taking 3/4 of 4 boxes, tells me I'm taking 3/4 times 4. And this question is asking, will the product be equal to, greater than, or less than 4? So if I actually rearrange this or multiply, I would realize that my product will be less than 4. Now, if I wanted to compare the product to the fraction 3/4, the product will be greater than 3/4. So for this, we realize that a whole number times a fraction, the product will be less than the whole number, but it will be greater than the fraction. And finally, for C, the Carter family has only 1/2 of a box of cereal at the beginning of the week. They ate 3/4 of the 1/2 box of cereal. Well, they want us to shade the model to show 3/4 of 1/2. And this takes us back to lesson 7.4 where we were modeling our multiplication problems. So if I have 1/2 of a box of cereal that they said we're starting with, right here is my 1/2 of a box of cereal. And then they ate 3/4 of that 1/2 of a box. So I can shade in 3 of the 4 equal sections going horizontally. So I know that my multiplication problem, because I'm showing 3/4 of 1/2, is 3/4 times 1/2. And again, I can find my answer from the model, or if I just take my understanding of two fractions being multiplied together, will the product be equal to, greater than, or less than 1/2? And then also for the 3/4. Well, I know that when I multiply two fractions together and both fractions are less than 1, the product will be less than both factors. So by using these 3 examples, we can now come up with different rules that we can follow when we're solving any of our questions today. So for lesson 7.5, we need to make sure that we understand that if we have a fraction times 1, the product will equal the fraction. If we have a fraction times a whole number that is greater than 1, so for example, if you took your 3/4 times 4, that 4 is greater than 1, the product will be less than the whole number, but greater than the fraction. And finally, if you have a fraction times a fraction, the product will be less than both fractions. So on the 7.5, 7.8 folder in Chapter 5 Schoology, I do have a PDF that is set up for you to be able to print out your rules for lesson 7.5, and then the rules for 7.8 is also on there as well. I highly encourage you to print this out. If you do not have a printer at home, please make sure that you are writing this down and keeping this information for when you're doing your homework examples. So now on page 446, I normally do not use my number lines to help us. I find that just using those rules really helps us understand how our answers will be. And if you still don't understand what those rules, you can also just multiply any of the problems together to then figure out whether your answer will be less than, greater than, or equal to. So I'm not going to go over this page 446 because I'm going to use the rules to help me solve any of the questions on page 447. So on 447, the share and show, I'm going to be using my rules as I answer. So number 1 says 4 times 7/8 will be, and we have to use either equal to, greater than, or less than, and we're comparing it to the 7/8. So looking back at my rules, I have a whole number times a fraction, and we stated that if we had a fraction times a whole number or a whole number times a fraction, that the answer would be less than the whole number, but greater than the fraction. And again, because we are comparing to the fraction factor, I do know that my answer would be greater than that fraction. Now for number 2, I have a fraction times a fraction, and we found when we did part C on page 445 that when we had a fraction times a fraction, the answer would be less than both factors. Number 3, we have a fraction times a whole number, and just like number 1, when we had our whole number times our fraction, our answer will be less than the whole number, but greater than the fraction. So I encourage you to pause at this point, do the on your own by yourself, and then start the video back up to check your answers with mine. So for number 4, I have 7/8 times 3/5, and I know that if I have a fraction times a fraction, my answer will be less than both factors. Number 5, whole number times a fraction. I know that my answer will be less than the whole number, but greater than the fraction. Number 6, I have 5 times 1/3. So again, my answer from those rules say that my product will be less than the whole number, but greater than the fraction. And for number 7, 6/11 times 1. Well, I know that I'm multiplying a fraction by 1, and according to my rules, my answer will be equal to the fraction. Now on your homework, you may see, instead of having it multiplied by 1, it would be 6/11 times 5/5. Please make sure you recognize that your 5/5 is equal to 1 whole. So if they ask, what would this be to the 6/11, just know that you would put equal to, just because that 5/5 equals 1 whole. Question number 8. Peter is planning on spending 2/3 as many hours watching television this week as he did last week. Is Peter going to spend more hours or fewer hours watching television this week? So if you're only watching 2/3 as much, that tells me that you're not going to be watching as long as you did the previous week. However, to help you understand this, you can assign a number of hours that Peter watched last week. So let's say he watched 3 hours of television last week, and we know that he's watching 2/3 as many this week, so that means we're taking 3 times 2/3. Well, because we're comparing it to what he did last week, and remember last week we said was 3 hours, 3 times 2/3 will be, and then we need to compare it to last week, which was 3. Well, according to my rules, if I have a whole number times a fraction, my answer would be less than the whole number. So Peter is going to spend less time watching TV this week, or fewer hours. Fewer also means less than. And then question number 9, Mrs. Rodriguez has 18 packages of pens in stock at her store on Monday. On Tuesday, she has 5/6 the number of pens she had on Monday. On Wednesday, she has 2/5 of the number of pens she had on Tuesday. How many packages of pens does she have on Wednesday? So they're not actually asking us to say if it's less than, equal to, or greater than any of the factors. They actually do want us to solve to figure out our final answer for this question. So we know that on Monday there were 18 packages. So I'm going to have 18 over 1 for Monday. And on Tuesday it says she has 5/6 of that number. So I'm going to multiply that by 5/6. Before I actually multiply, I want to cancel, so that way it's less work at the end. So 18 and 6 can both be divided by 6. 18 divided by 6 is 3. 6 divided by 6 is 1. So I have top times top, which is 15, bottom times bottom, which is 1. And I'm going to go ahead and leave that 15 over 1 because I know on Wednesday she has 2/5 of the number from Tuesday. Well, I need to multiply that 15 over 1 times 2/5 next. And I'm going to cancel the 15 and 5 both by 5. 15 divided by 5 is 3. 5 divided by 5 is 1. Now I can take top times top, which is 6. Bottom times bottom is 1. And now I know that 6 over 1 equals 6. So how many packages of pens does she have on Wednesday? She has 6 packages. So now I'm going to go ahead and move on to lesson 7.8. 7.8 can be found in your textbook on page 465. And this time we're going to be comparing mixed number factors and products. So our essential question for this lesson, how does the size of the product compare to the size of one factor when multiplying fractions greater than 1? So under Unlock the Problem, you can make general statements about the relative size of a product when one factor is equal to 1, less than 1, or greater than 1. So we're essentially doing the same thing that we just did on 7.5, but this time we have mixed numbers that are put into our problems as well. So if we would use the model, it says Charisse has a recipe that requires 1 1/4 cups of flour. She wants to know how much flour she would need if she made the recipe as written, if she made half the recipe, and if she made 1 1/2 times the recipe. So for part A, they want us to shade the models to show 1 1/4 scaled by 1, and then for part B, scaled by 1/2, and then part C by 1 1/2. So for part A, obviously if you have 1 1/4, you are shading in one entire rectangle. And then the second rectangle, to show my 1/4, I'm going to break that into 4 equal sections. And I'm going to shade one of those 4 sections. So I know that if I take any number times 1, so if I have 1 1/4 and I multiply it by 1, the product will be equal to 1 1/4. So now for part B, I am again going to be using that 1 1/4, but this time I'm going to take half of that. So for my 1 1/4, I know that I would shade in one entire rectangle. Again, break this one apart into 4 equal pieces to show my 1/4. But now I need to take half of that. So when I take half of that, I am going to also break the first original whole up into 4 equal pieces, so I can show half of both to see how many pieces I would then have left. So if I would shade in half of those, I'm now showing that I have 5 pieces out of all of it that would be representing my final answer that were shaded in twice. So I notice about the product when it is multiplied by 1/2 or a fraction less than 1, I can say that the product will be less than my 1 1/4. So now in part C, because we are taking our 1 1/2 times 1 1/4, we're essentially combining the two answers from A and B. So on A, we had one entire rectangle shaded in, and then 1/4 of the second rectangle shaded in. So that is giving us our 1 times our 1 1/4. And then we're going to add on the product of B. So if you recall, we shaded in one entire rectangle for B. We then broke apart the second rectangle into 4 equal pieces and shaded 1/4 of it. And then we split the first rectangle into 3 equal pieces as well, or I'm sorry, 4 equal pieces as well, and then cut both rectangles in half, and then showed the answer with using the model of your 1 1/4 times 1/2. So now we're combining both of those answers together, and we know from A, the product was equal to 1 1/4, and B, we knew that the product was less than 1 1/4. Well, if you combine both of those answers together, what can you say about the product when 1 1/4 is multiplied by a number greater than 1? We would know that the product will be greater than both factors. So just like on 7.5, I have the rules listed down for 7.8. And again, if you do not have a printer, I highly encourage you to write these down. So if I would have a mixed number and I multiply it by 1, the product will be equal to the mixed number. If I have a mixed number times a fraction, the product will be less than the mixed number, but greater than the fraction. If I have a mixed number times a whole number greater than 1, the product will be greater than both factors. And if I have a mixed number times a mixed number, the product will also be greater than both factors. Remember, mixed numbers are numbers that are bigger than one whole. So it's like you're taking two numbers that are bigger than 1 and multiplying it together. So therefore we know that our answer or our product should be bigger than both of the factors. So now, moving on to the next page. Again, I do not use the number line, so I'm going to go ahead and skip on to the share and show that can be found on page 467. And I'm going to again complete the statements with equal to, greater than, or less than. I am not going to show the picture model for number 1 because I'm going to use the rules that I have given you in order to figure out if our answer would be equal to, greater than, or less than. So for number 1, 5 6 times 2 1/5. So I have a fraction times a mixed number. And if I look at my rules, I see that when I have a fraction times a mixed number, my answer will be less than the mixed number. Moving on to number 2, I have 1 1/5 times 2 2/3. So I have two mixed numbers, and my very last rule said if I have a mixed number times a mixed number, that my product will be greater than both factors. Number 3, 4/5 times 2 2/5. So again, I have a fraction times a mixed number, and I'm comparing my product to the mixed number. So looking at my rules, I see that the product will be less than the mixed number. At this point, go ahead and pause, try to complete the next questions on your own, and then restart the video back up to find your answers. For number 4, I have 2 over 2, which I know equals 1, and they're multiplying that by 1 1/2. Well, I know from my rules, any number times 1 always equals that same number, so equal to. For number 5, 2/3 times 3 1/6. A fraction times a mixed number. The rule says that my product will be less than the mixed number. For number 6, I have an unknown number or an unknown factor that is being multiplied by 1 2/3, and they're saying that my answer is 5/6. Well, knowing my rules, if I'm multiplying a number times a mixed number, the missing factor has to be less than 1. That missing factor has to be a fraction that is less than 1 in order to get a product that would be less than a mixed number. For number 7, I have a missing factor again, and it's being multiplied by a mixed number, and notice that my product is greater than that mixed number. So therefore, I know that the unknown factor has to be greater than 1, so that way it could be greater than both factors. So I am going to go ahead and move on to the homework. So the homework is found from lessons 7.5 and 7.8. So it is just the front pages of 7.5 and 7.8. So your homework on 7.5 will be found on page 449. You are doing 2 through 8. On Schoology, they are drop-down boxes where you are going to state if they are greater than, less than, or equal to. And then on 7.8, you are going to do the exact same thing where you are going to be solving from page 469. Again, 2 through 8, doing the drop-down boxes that are stating if the products are greater than, less than, or equal to. Please let us know if you have any questions. Thank you.